Ms. Ginsburg, that is the wrong approach. I yield the floor, yield back the balance of my time.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
President.
Senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask to dispense with the quorum.
Without objection.
Mr. President, thank you. And I'm asked for unanimous consent to speak up to 10 minutes, 5 minutes, even 5 minutes on in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a few minutes ago, I was presiding over the Senate, and I heard the remarks from my friend, the senior senator from Missouri, Claire McCaskill, who sits next to me, and I was just intrigued by her response to the vote that had just taken place from my colleagues who preach every day about deficit reduction. And they had, as Senator McCaskill said, they had an opportunity to pick the lowest hanging fruit there is, take away the tax breaks and the tax dollar subsidies that go to the oil interests in this country. And you think about that. I mean, we are giving incentives. Taxpayers are spending dollars, hard-earned tax dollars coming from workers in Dayton and Springfield and Akron and Canton that go directly to the most profitable industries in the history of the world, perhaps, and that's particularly the big 5 oil companies, and making billions and billions and billions of dollars. Yet we're just simply saying that's okay to give them those kinds of tax breaks and tax subsidies. That's even putting aside the fact that every time there's a pipeline outage, or every time there's a fire at a refinery, or every time there's turmoil in the Middle East, that the oil companies and the speculators use it as a chance to spike up oil prices. They do it over and over. It's like clockwork. If there's a problem in Iran, prices go up. If there's a fire at a refinery, prices go up. If there's an outage in a pipeline, prices go up. And it's time that the government, as the presiding officer's bill will do, the presiding officer from Vermont who's led this effort to get the Commodities Future Trading Commission, the Department of Justice, to put the government on the side of the motorist, of the small business, of the consumer, and as Senator McCaskill said earlier, on this low-hanging fruit to save tax dollars is really obvious, and on the other side to make sure that we go after the speculators when they rip us off. These speculators, according to a recent study, 56 cents of every dollar, or 56 cents, I'm sorry, of every gallon of gas that you pay when you go to the pump in gas stations all over America goes to the hedge fund operators and the speculators. That's about $10 to $12 to $15 a tank, depending on how big a car you drive and what kind of mileage you get. And that on the one hand, we're not saying to the oil companies, no more subsidies, no more tax breaks. And the other, we're not saying to the speculators, stop this. You're not going to get away with this anymore. And the government has got to be on the side of the middle class here and fight back. I thank the President. I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to speak for about 10 minutes, and if someone else comes to the floor, I'll be happy to even shorten that opportunity. But I had to come to the floor, Mr. President, to support the leadership of Senator Barbara Boxer and Senator Inhofe from Oklahoma, who have worked, Mr. President, for over a year to bring a very balanced and fundamentally important and essential infrastructure bill to the floor of the House. Now, we have many arguments on this floor. We've been arguing about judges. I heard Senator Grassley give a pretty tough speech about his opinion of some of our Supreme Court justices. I don't agree with much of what he said, but he's entitled to his opinion, and we have those debates, and they're good people on both sides. We're debating oil taxes and whether the oil industry is paying too much or too little. And so you could have arguments about that. But even our children in kindergarten, even our citizens who don't pay attention to some more difficult arguments, understand roads, bridges, and mass transit. They understand hard hat jobs. They see people every day laying bricks, pouring concrete, going to work at steel mills and, factories that produce the materials that build our infrastructure. They drive over potholes, Mr. President, all day long. They ride down the interstates with 18-wheelers whizzing by them in smaller cars because they're trying to be more fuel efficient with their heart in their chest, with their children in the back seat, and they look up to Congress, to the House of Representatives, and say, where is our transportation bill? Now, this isn't a transportation bill that was written by one senator, voted on by a slim majority. This transportation bill that the House refuses to even consider was built by one of the more progressive and one of the most conservative members of this body. It was voted on almost unanimously out of committee, brought to the floor of the Senate just a couple of weeks ago, and received over 75 votes in a body that can't decide about our judges, really. We can't decide about the post office. We can't decide about oil and gas taxes. But 75 of us said, we are tired of running our highways and our transit on 90-day, 30-day, 60-day extensions. I think this is the 27th or 26th short-term extension since 2009. What kind of way is this to run a government? For the other side of this building that talks about let's put business practices to work, let's be more efficient in the way we operate, let's operate more like a business. Do you know, Mr. President, any business in America, large or small, that operates with a 90-day vision? Do you know one? I don't know one. I mean, I understand businesses have 6-month plans and year, but they always have like that 5-year long range. They might have 6-month goals. I don't know one business in America that operates on a 90-day plan. So here we are at the 9th hour again. We have a bill. We produced a bill. Now, if the House had a bill, you know, I'm a centrist, so if the House had a bill, I'd be working with the middle of the road over there trying to say, well, this is what your bill does, this is what our bill does. Let's just, you know, we can't have our way completely here in the Senate, although I'd like to have our way more of the time, but I understand. They don't have a bill, Mr. President. They don't have a bill to negotiate because they can't even get a bill together among the 3 committees of jurisdiction over there. Again, if they had a bill, I know that Senator Boxer, Senator Inhofe would be happy to negotiate. Maybe they want a 4-year bill, we wanted 2, maybe we negotiated 3. They don't like the mass transit portion, we like the mass transit portion, we could come to some terms. They don't like the way the formula works, we like the general way the formula works, we could come to terms. I understand that. But what I don't understand, what no one in the country understands, what the mayors are having a hard time understanding, the governors are having a hard time understanding, and businesses that operate in my state, represented by the Chamber of Commerce, the NFIB, and to Mainstream Alliance of Small Business, from the left to the center to the right, don't understand is how you don't have a bill at all, and you haven't been able to put one together for, we've now been in this Congress for a year and a half. You've had 1.5 years to put a bill together, and you've yet to come up with one. So we put one together that looks pretty good. I mean, it's no one that I know of from any group has said really anything really bad about our bill. I mean, it's pretty, you know, plain, I mean, in one sense, that it's not changing the course of Western civilization. It's just trying to fund roads, bridges, and transit that are just fundamental to the operations not only of our government, but our economy, and frankly, the economy of the world. Because without highways, it's hard to import or export products. So this bill has impacts way beyond even America. So for the life of me, I cannot understand how the House of Representatives is going to leave and go on vacation and think they have done their job by giving us another 90-day extension. Now, I don't know what the leadership's going to do, but I want my vote recorded as no. I'm not going to hold up everybody here over the holidays, but I want to say I want my vote recorded as no. I am not going to continue to support 30-day, 60-day, 90-day extensions to a transportation bill, which really, in the scheme of things, should not be that complicated to pass. There are other things much more controversial that we could be, really having very serious debates about. Building highways and roads and transit shouldn't be one of them. And we're hurting jobs, Mr. President. We heard the Republicans, and I can't blame the Republicans in the Senate. I think they have really been, for the most part, really terrific, actually, in working with Senator Boxer, and they've even given a majority of the votes. So I guess really my focus is on Republicans in the House. I don't think that they maybe have taken the time to really look at the Senate bill and to see how really balanced it is. And one part I wish they'd really read, and that's the part I want to talk about for the next 5 minutes, and I know other senators are here to speak. I hope the Gulf Coast members from Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida, and together, that's a pretty big coalition. I don't know the total number, but I think it's got to be over 75 members from Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida. I hope they would read the section of the transportation bill that talks about the Restore Act, because I've spent a great deal of time over here with my good friend and wonderful leader, Senator Shelby, with Senator Boxer, with over 300 organizations for over a year to build a bill that's now part of the transportation bill, that in addition to building highways in Florida and transit and roads in Alabama and Mississippi, will also, for the first time in the history of our country, first time, direct a significant portion of penalty money paid by a polluter, BP, that polluted the Gulf Coast. Good company in some ways, really messed up that well, though. Really messed up that well. And they just spilled gallons and gallons and 5 million barrels of oil. We have shrimp that are coming in our nets with no eyes. We have turtles that are washing up on our shores dead. We have research needs in the Gulf Coast that we've, there's been no time in our history where we've needed that money more. So my question is to the Gulf Coast Republican members and Democratic members, what is it about this bill that is driving you so crazy that you can't accept $10 billion that the federal government's trying to give you? Because that's what Restore could potentially send to the Gulf Coast, a portion of the fine. We don't know whether that fine is going to be $5 billion or $10 billion or $20 billion. But we do know it's going to be substantial, because under current law, they have to pay $1,000 for every barrel spilled, or $4,200 if it was gross negligence. So in the Senate transportation bill, this body, again, in a very infrequent show of bipartisan support and concern for the Gulf Coast, America's energy coast, understanding the great erosion that's taken place in the delta of Louisiana, which drains 40% of the continent, understanding that so much of our shipping and seafood industry relies on this coast, not that the other coasts are not vitally important, and the underinvestment that's been made. 75% of the Senate basically stood up and said, okay, let's redirect this penalty money to where the injury is. That is the Restore Act, and that's in the Senate bill that we sent over to the House, which they have absolutely just rejected. So I don't know what magic there is about this next 90 days, but I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to register my vote as no, and then I'm going to go home, and I'm going to work harder in Louisiana and along the Gulf Coast to explain to the people of our region how much is at stake by getting a longer-term transportation bill. 2 years maybe is not as long as we'd like to have, but it's better than 30 days, it's better than 60 days, it's better than 90 days. And I'm going to go ask and explain that not only is the transportation bill vital for Louisiana's project but for approving the Restore Act, which I know that the House has indicated their support for. They have indicated a support for the concept of the Restore Act. But the act itself is in the transportation bill. Sheldon, do you need time?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to wrap up. There are other members on the floor that are speaking, and I thank the leader, Barbara Boxer, who's here, and there are other members to speak. But for 90 days, let's get back to work and go for a long-term transportation bill that's a real jobs bill that will help the whole country, but particularly the Gulf Coast with the Restore Act.
Mr. President.
Republican leader.
Mr. President.
Oh, I'm sorry. Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, I see the Republican leader is on the floor, and I understand that there may be a unanimous consent that is propounded, and I can offer some remarks in the context of an objection and a counter proposal if the minority leader would like to proceed now.
From Rhode Island, I'm not the one who's going to be asking consent.
Very good. Well, I would like to join I'll yield to the majority leader as soon as he seeks the floor, which I guess is now, so I'll yield to the majority leader. Mr. President.
Senator from...
Until I get a signal from the majority leader that he will seek recognition, at which point I will yield.
Senator from Rhode Island.
I wanted to follow in the footsteps of Senator Landrieu of Louisiana and reflect my own dismay and dissatisfaction with the situation that we are in right now. The House extension on the highway bill, which we're going to be asked to proceed with, is going to cost, as far as the estimates I can see so far, around 100,000 jobs. And that is damage to our economy that is a self-inflicted wound. More specifically, it is a House-inflicted wound. And I would very much like to see the Senate fight to force action on the Senate highway bill, bipartisan bill with weeks of amendments and fully paid for, a serious bill, instead of inflicting this kind of damage on our economy with a short-term extension. Does the majority leader seek recognition? Allow me to yield.
Mr. President,
Majority leader.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to H.R. 4281, the Surface Transportation Act, its Action Extension Act, which was received from the House and is now at the desk. That the bill be read 3 times and the Senate proceed to vote on that matter.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
Senator from
And
California.
there are several of us who reserve our right to object. What the House has done is guarantee job losses for this country. Already, their dithering on the Senate bill, not taking it up for a vote, has cost about 100,000 jobs. Thousands of businesses are at stake, and eventually we're talking about 3 million jobs at stake. And the fact that they would do this without any commitment to get to conference, without any commitment to finish their job, and run off on vacation is the reason I'm reserving the right to object. So I asked that the unanimous consent request be modified so that an amendment which is at the desk, the text of S. 1813, the Surface Transportation Bill, passed by the Senate on March 14, 2012 by a large bipartisan majority vote of 74-22, be agreed to. The bill, as amended, be read a 3rd time and passed, and the motions to reconsider be laid upon the table.
Is there an objection to the request for modification?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object.
Republican leader.
The problem with accepting the Boxer amendment is that it would shut down the federal aid highway program, which means states wanting reimbursement for projects will not get paid. It would cause additional nervous state Department of Transportation directors to cut back further on work because there will be no reimbursements on federal projects. And it would cost the Highway Trust Fund $100 million per day for any day the gas tax is not collected, thereby adding to the deficit. Therefore, I object.
Objection is heard. Is there objection to the original request? Senator from Maryland.
Reserving the right to object, and I was listening to the distinguished Republican leader, and let me just challenge some of the assumptions, and maybe we can get to a consent here. I am very confident in talking to members of the House of Representatives of their body that there's ample support to pass not only the bipartisan surface transportation bill that passed this body by overwhelming vote, but a consensus bill that came out of our committees by unanimous vote in both the Environment and Public Works Committee and the Banking Committee. There is general agreement that this bill should be enacted into law. So I am confident that if the Speaker of the House brings this bill to the floor of the House of Representatives, it will be passed. There's adequate votes for it. Here's the problem, to my friend, the distinguished Republican leader. If we pass another short-term extension, we're going to lose jobs. In my own state of Maryland, we can't let the contracts on major maintenance projects with a 90-day extension. We can't move forward with the planning of our highways, our bridges, our transit systems with another short-term extension. And this takes us to the middle of the summer. We lose the construction season on getting transportation work done. So I would just urge the distinguished leader that we do have the opportunity to pass the bill right now today. And if we stand firm and tell the House of Representatives that we want to do what's right for the American people, that in the Senate we had a bipartisan bill, a consensus bill. What's happening in the House is extremely partisan. Let's get together on the most important jobs bill that we can pass. It's thousands of jobs in Maryland, and it's millions of jobs in this nation that are affected by passing a surface transportation. So that, I'm hoping that I convinced the distinguished Republican leader. I would ask unanimous consent that the request be modified so that an amendment, which is at the desk, the text of S. 1813, the Surface Transportation Bill, passed by the Senate on March 14, 2012, by a large bipartisan majority vote of 74 to 22, be agreed to, the bill as amended be read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be laid upon the table.
Is there objection to the modification?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object.
Republican leader.
I'll spare the Senate the repetitious repeating my remarks with regard to the initial Boxer modification, but the principles remain the same. I object.
Objection is heard. Is there objection to the original request?
Yeah.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, I would like to join my colleagues in trying to find a way to attach the Senate bill, which passed this body better than 3-1, with a huge bipartisan majority, which is a good bill, which was paid for, which had weeks of collegial work back and forth with bipartisan amendments, which is a serious bill, which every major business group in the country, which every major labor union in the country, which even environmental groups are supporting, and which, as the senator from Maryland has said, would virtually certainly be passed by the House if the Speaker would only bring it up. But for partisan reasons, the House has refused to even bring it up for a vote, and instead they've sent us over this extension, which will cost 100,000 jobs. It is my view that if we can send it back in this form, we will not experience the parade of horribles that the distinguished Republican leader has suggested, because it will not come to that point. They will, in fact, pass the Senate bill. We will have a real highway bill, not a partisan extension that kills 100,000 jobs. It's 1,000 jobs in my home state of Rhode Island. We're over 10% unemployment. This is a self-inflicted wound that hurts Rhode Island, that hurts my home state. It makes no sense, and therefore I ask again, and I apologize for coming back to this, but I think it's really important that we try to defend this body, which has worked well together, which has made a sensible, serious bill from being infected by the dysfunction that is presently taking place in the House, and that this extension is a representation of that dysfunction. So I again ask unanimous consent that the majority leader's request be modified so that the amendment at the desk, the text of our highway bill, Senate 1813, be added to the bill, that the text be agreed to, the bill's amended, be read a third time and passed, and the motions to reconsider be laid upon the table. And I thank both the majority leader and the minority leader for their patience.
Is there objection to the modification?
I object.
Objection is heard. Is there objection to the original request?
Reserving the right to object.
Senator from New York.
Yeah, and I'm not going to object, but, Mr. President, I want to just reiterate the comments of my colleagues from California, Maryland, and Rhode Island, and I know that a colleague from Louisiana will say the same. We had a broad bipartisan bill here. Transportation, highways, are a linchpin of our economic recovery, not only in the jobs that they create now, rebuilding and building highways, but in making our economy more efficient. China's building 4 times the infrastructure we are. India's building, I think, more infrastructure than we are. And here in the Senate, to the credit of both sides, we have a broad bipartisan bill that moves us forward. It's not everything I would want or any of us would want. Put together masterfully by Senator Boxer and Senator Inhofe, political opposites. And the House, in its paralysis, because there's a small group who frankly don't believe the government should be in infrastructure at all, tie it in a knot and force us with the awful choice of either shutting things down because they're not going to budge, or just renewing an old bill which needs updating, which throws people out of work. They are creating paralysis in this country, in the case of infrastructure and in many other cases. If the public wants to know why the country isn't growing at a greater rate, if it wants to know why there's such high unemployment in the construction industries, look at the ideologues over there and their refusal to face reality, to deal with their colleagues, and to put this country, not us, in a take-it-or-leave-it position. This 90-day extension is not the way to go. The way to go is to pass the Senate bill, and I hope that those on the other side of the aisle, pushed by outside folks from both business, management, and all across the country, will see the error of their ways and change their ways over the next few months. I thank my colleague and yield the floor.
Is there objection to the original request?
Reserving the right to object.
Senator from Louisiana.
And I might object, Mr. President, because I think this is a very serious matter. Reserving the right to object because, as the majority leader well knows, if we would follow Senator Boxer's leadership, sending back to the House the Senate bill, we would not only not lose any jobs, we would create 1.9 million jobs, and for the Restore Act, which is very important to the Gulf Coast, it would create another 300,000 jobs. The only action that is going to lose jobs is the action that we're being basically forced to accept right now, sent over by a partisan House of Representatives to go to another short-term extension. This country, Mr. President, doesn't need short-term extensions. It needs long-term answers. And it needs jobs they can count on. Every business in America relies on this transportation bill. We've been now going to short-term extensions for 3 years. It's time to stop. And I want my leader to know, who's on the floor, I may object in the next few minutes, but I absolutely will object to any other short-term resolution on this bill for as long as this Congress is in session. This is enough. Now, had this bill gotten out of here with just Democrats on it, I'd say, you know what, we don't have a leg to stand on because we don't really have a balanced bill and we can't really jam this down, you know, the other side. But this bill got out of here with a 75 or 76 votes. Now, 2 years is not 5 years, but it's better than 3 months. It's a bill that you could pass that we can build on. It's a bill that people could go to sleep tonight knowing that they have a job tomorrow. So I really object to the minority leader's comments about this bill, if our action is going to lose jobs. No, we've been here working hard to save jobs. And I hope that the Republicans, when they go home, they will hear from the business community, from the right, the middle, and the left. They will hear from environmental groups. What are you guys doing? And the final thing I want to say, Mr. President, as I'm objecting, is if the House had a bill, then this would be a negotiation between two bills. The problem here is they don't even have a bill. How do you negotiate with a group that doesn't have a bill? They have ideas, they have philosophies, they have platforms, and they have speeches, but they don't have a bill. We couldn't negotiate with them if we wanted to. There is no bill. That's why we're telling the country, look, I don't know what their problem is, they have many, but we have a bill. So if they can't get their bill together, take the one we put together. But no, that's too simple for them. So I am reserving the right to object. I'm going to listen to what my leader has to say, and I might object. I know everybody wants to go home. I know we want to have this unanimous consent. But my state not only has its transportation money wrapped up in this, it has its hope for the future wrapped up because the Restore Act is in that bill. And for the first time, this Senate stood up since I've been here and said, you're right, Gulf Coast, you do a lot, you've been injured a lot, we're going to help you. So that bill's in there too, which is why I'm really hard-pressed to say I'll go for a 90-day extension. So reserving the right to object, I ask unanimous consent the request be modified so that an amendment which is at the desk, the text of S. 1813, the Surface Transportation Bill passed by the Senate on March 14th by a large bipartisan majority of 74 to 22 be agreed to. The bill as amended be read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be laid on the table.
Is there objection to the modification?
Object.
Objection is heard. Is there objection to the original request of the majority leader? If not, so ordered. Clerk will report.
H.R. 4281, an act providing extension of federal aid highway, highway safety, motor carrier safety, transit, and other programs funded out of the Highway Trust Fund pending enactment of a multi-year law reauthorizing such programs.
Clerk will read the bill for the third time.
H.R. 4281, an act providing extension of federal aid highway and so forth.
The question is on passage of the measure. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it.
And can I be registered?
The measure is passed.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
it's been a difficult time for everyone, and I would hope in that we have what none of us wanted. This was passed here in the Senate by a very nice bipartisan margin. I would hope that during the Easter recess that the House will be able to come back with something that they can, as Senator Landrieu mentioned, at least have some piece of legislation they give to us and try to work toward a conclusion or accept our bill, which is our preference. So I appreciate very much the comments of my colleagues and appreciate their patience and understanding of the situation we find ourselves, which is not a good one.
Senator from California.
President, I know my colleague, Senator Collins, has been waiting to speak. I just want to speak very briefly, like a minute. Let's be clear what just happened. What just happened is that the House sent us a 90-day extension of our transportation programs with not one dime of revenue in there to fund those. And the Highway Trust Fund is on the road to bankruptcy. So they are the first, in my memory, the first legislative body here in the Capitol to ever extend for this period of time without a dollar, which means an acceleration of bankruptcy of the trust fund. What else did they do? They just guaranteed 100,000 people that they're not going to get their jobs. And they guaranteed hundreds of businesses they're not going to get their jobs. And they sent out a signal that America should be ready for hardship because they didn't even have the decency to put in that extension a written commitment to produce a bill, to get to conference with us, and to get a bill to the President. Oh, no. They run off on their vacation and leave people twisting in the wind. Well, I want it to be known. I am one of the chairs who worked on this. There are many other people who were fantastic on this bill from both sides of the aisle. And I know, I spoke to Senator Inhofe today about this. We want this bill done. And I'm going to use every tool at my disposal as one United States Senator to keep the pressure on the Republican House. Speaker Boehner, you are not Speaker of the Republicans. You are Speaker of the House. Reach your hand across the aisle like Senator Inhofe reached across the aisle for me and I reached across it to him. And Jay Rockefeller reached across to Senator Hutchinson and she reached across. And Tim Johnson reached across to Shelby and he reached across. And Max Baucus had an array of Republicans work with him over there in the Finance Committee. We know we can do this. But what the House has done is send a very clear message of job loss and hardship. It is unacceptable, and I look forward to working on this every single day. Now we have 90 days. Tomorrow it'll be 89, 88. We're going to count down, and we're going to keep the pressure on. And we're not going to let this transportation program go up in smoke because it has been in place since Dwight Eisenhower was president. And it's a sad day for America today, a very sad day. But we never give up over here, and James Inhofe isn't going to give up, and we're going to fight hard to get a bill. Thank you. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maine.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that I be permitted to proceed as if in morning business for up to 15 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, during the past week, the Supreme Court heard arguments on the constitutionality of President Obama's health care law. This week also marks the 2-year anniversary of the President signing that law. Now, Mr. President, there is no question that our health care system required and still requires significant reform. In passing this law, however, Congress failed to follow the Hippocratic oath of first do no harm. The new law increases health care costs, hurts our seniors and health care providers, and imposes billions of dollars in new taxes, fees, and penalties. This, in turn, will lead to fewer choices and higher insurance costs for many middle-income American families and most small businesses, the opposite of what real health care reform should do. I find it particularly disturbing that President Obama's health care law does not do enough to rein in the cost of health care and to provide consumers with more affordable choices. In fact, Medicare's chief actuary estimates that the law will increase health care spending across the economy by more than $300 billion. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office says that the law will actually increase premiums for the average family plan by $2,100. Moreover, a recent report issued by the CBO found that the new law will cost $1.76 trillion between now and the year 2022. That is twice as much as the bill's original 10-year price tag of $940 million. The new law will also mean fewer choices for many middle-income Americans and small businesses. All individual and small group policies sold in our country will soon have to fit into one of four categories. Mr. President, one size does not fit all. In Maine, almost 90% of those purchasing coverage in the individual market have a policy that is different from the standards in the new law. I'm also very concerned about the impact of the law on Maine's small businesses, which are our state's job creation engine. The new law discourages small companies from hiring new employees and from paying them more. It could also lead to onerous financial penalties, even for those small businesses that are struggling to provide health insurance for their employees. According to a Gallup survey taken earlier this year, 48% of small businesses are not hiring because of the potential cost of health insurance under the new law. The director of the Congressional Budget Office has testified that the new health care law will mean 800,000 fewer American jobs over the next decade. Mr. President, even when the law tries to help small businesses, it misses the mark. For example, I have long been a proponent of tax credits to help small businesses afford health insurance for their employees. The new credits for small businesses in the health care law, however, are so poorly structured and phased out in such a way that businesses will actually be penalized when they hire new workers or pay their employees more. Moreover, they are temporary. The tax credits are temporary and can only be claimed for 2 years in an insurance exchange. I'm also very concerned that the new law is paid for in part through more than a $500 billion cut in Medicare, a program which is already facing serious long-term financing problems. It simply does not make sense to rely on deep cuts in Medicare to finance a new entitlement program at a time when the number of seniors in this country is on the rise. Mr. President, we need to fix and save Medicare, not add to its financial strains. Moreover, according to the administration's own chief actuary, those deep Medicare cuts could push 1 in 5 hospitals, nursing homes, and home health providers into the red. I'm particularly concerned about the impact on rural states like Maine. Many of those providers could simply stop taking Medicare patients. That would jeopardize access to care for millions of our seniors. Mr. President, it didn't have to be that way. The bitter rhetoric and the partisan gridlock over the past few years have obscured the very important fact that there are many health care reforms that have overwhelming support in both parties. For example, we should have been able to agree on generous tax credits for self-employed individuals and small businesses to help them afford health insurance. That would have reduced the number of uninsured Americans. We should have been able to agree on insurance market reforms that would have prevented insurance companies from denying coverage to children who have pre-existing conditions, that would have permitted children to remain on their parents' insurance policies until age 26, that would require standardized claim forms to reduce administrative costs, and that would allow consumers to purchase insurance across state lines. Those are just some examples of health care reforms that would enjoy and that do enjoy widespread bipartisan support. Mr. President, we also should be able to agree on delivery system reforms that reward value over volume and quality instead of quantity. We should be able to agree on reforms that increase transparency throughout the health care system so that consumers can compare prices and quality more easily. I know that the presiding officer state, and Dartmouth College in particular, has done a great deal of work in this area, as have many health care providers and many hospitals in the state of Maine. They're experimenting with new delivery models that will help them better control chronic disease treatments, which in turn will not only improve the quality of health care, but also help to lower costs. And we should be able to agree on ways to address the serious health care workforce shortages that plague rural and small-town America. Simply having an insurance card will do you little or no good if there is no one available to provide the health care. In short, Mr. President, I believe that Congress made a real error in passing Obamacare. We should repeal the law so that we can start over to work together in a bipartisan way to draft a health care bill that achieves the consensus goals of providing more choice, containing health care costs, improving quality and access, and making health care coverage more affordable for all Americans. Thank you, Mr. President. I would yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.